Wake up, buyer payer people. It's a beautiful day. Go grab yourself another cup of joe and say hello to Jim and Michelle Rhoads on the Buy Here Pay Here Morning Show. Take it away, you two.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday.
Good morning. Back in the podcast studio for the first time in a bit. So since Friday,
Since
right?
Friday, yeah. I'm going to turn you so that because you're like way off on the side of
I just kind of scooted over.
Oh,
so
okay.
It was
Gotcha.
me, not the camera.
Not the camera.
Yeah, all good. Just a couple quick updates. Saw that the poll results are coming in on people who attended the
a
dealer
lot
forum.
Of our friends and colleagues and all of that. It sounds like it was a real great conference.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to reach out to some of them and ask them to be guests on Friday so we can talk about what their experience was. And a lot of people, including a handful of our V8 dealers, were there. And so I'm interested in hearing from them.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them attended an event like that for the first time.
Oh, right
really
on.
thought it was highly valuable. So
good.
Yeah.
Good.
There's one now, Rudy. So
Hey,
Rudy was
Rudy.
one of the ones who attended. So good morning, Rudy. I'll be in touch, Rudy. I want to see
Rudy.
about having you come and be a guest on Friday so you can kind of share your perspective on the event and what you got out of it, because we do want to make sure that folks know, so the next time that comes around, they can be aware of what it is and what kind of benefit dealers enjoy from that. So, it's roundtable discussions on hot topics and good stuff. Anytime you can put dealers together in a room to talk about the challenges that they're dealing with. And
I know one of our friends, Tyler Simmons, was there. I think that he moderated one of the tables, and I'm looking forward to hearing from him.
Yeah.
How that conversation went.
Sure.
Yeah.
I want to hear from some dealers on the takeaways. So So let's just we'll gather some up and bring them back here on Friday. So
okay. Awesome.
All good. Yep. But otherwise, no announcements. A couple of personal announcements. Had one of our dealers, a client, they won their softball tournament last night. You didn't know that was even happening.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Their daughter, more specifically. He was coaching
congratulations
the 9-year-old daughters.
Your daughter and for coaching. I mean, that's a big deal.
Way to go, Rachel.
Yeah.
He said her name in the text message this morning.
Oh, that's sweet. That's very, very sweet.
But anyway, that's that. And then we had a couple of our dealers had new baby boys in the family. So
yeah. And we're heading into the holidays. I think that we're officially done with conference season, or for the year.
Yeah.
There's nothing else that's going to be going on. And usually the next conference, big one, I think, is Buy Here Pay Here United.
In April, usually. Yep. Early May, late April. Yeah.
So y'all get a break for a little bit and get ready for the next round.
Stocking up on eggnog.
After you're done with the holidays, start budgeting.
Yeah. for the conference season next year. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, I think we should dive into our topic.
Right on.
And this topic today is around profitability, which is such a wide topic. And so I really want to kind of dig into this, thinking about folks who are new to the industry. And we're going to end up sharing some things that for our experienced folks would be old information or something they've long known, but I think we'll also share a few things that might be new way to look at some of this stuff.
Okay.
So we just got to first be careful even just about the terminology. Profitability in a CPA's terms would be, there's exactly one way to calculate your profitability, and here's what it looks like at the bottom of your income statement or your profit and loss report. And that's true as it relates to reporting to the IRS, the method that the IRS uses to arrive at our income, so they know what kind of income tax we owe, right?
Yep.
But in our Buy Here Pay Here business, it just the income statements and the bank statements don't always go hand in hand. So there's cash flow, right? Most dealers that I work with, they really think day to day in terms of cash flow and cash position.
Yeah, we've talked an awful lot about when we put a dealer into when they're wanting to start, and one of the first questions is what's your overall finational model?
Sure.
And so there's equity and there's cash.
That's kind of my own terminology. There's models that are focused on growth and profits and equity and delayed cash
like
return.
Yeah,
right?
because you're just investing everything back in to build it to a certain
grow.
a certain
Mhm.
size
Right.
and strength. Yeah.
So that's just
But
as simple
this
as putting cash in with the expectation the cash is not coming back for a while, right?
mhm.
And I've talked about a lot of times you go to these conferences, and I'm sure some of them were in attendance in New Orleans. Like folks are established, and they're
Mhm.
still negative on cash, and so
Mhm.
they're still seeking capital. They're
Yeah.
still seeking additional funding and
Yeah,
growth money
yeah.
and some of that kind. And we're seeing that even in our VA
Yeah,
groups.
I was yes. I mean, that seems to be a really big conversation. I'm on the Neo users group, and
Mhm.
that's something that they're kind of investigating too, is capital options. So it's
Oh,
just
really? Huh.
yeah. It was interesting. I was like, that's a new one to
Huh.
add to their. But I have no idea if it's something that. But the point is that even in that group too, that capital is a big question.
Yeah, it
It's
is. It's just this is a
yeah,
capital intensive
yeah.
industry. Capital is always going to be in pursuit. People are always going to be in pursuit of money
Mhm.
and capital
Yeah.
and just growing and everybody's trying to build their business and increase their volume and their
Mhm.
portfolio size, and that just takes money typically.
Yeah, it
So
does.
we've got some slow growth people out there who are kind of doing a snail's pace kind of growth model and reinvesting what they get in, and that works for them. But more dealers are doing the kind of approach where they have to source external capital
Yeah.
in order to really
Well, and
fund the
it's
growth.
because the capital needed has changed
Yeah.
a lot
Yep.
since you first
Yeah,
got into
for
buy here,
sure.
pay
It
here.
jumped a lot
Yeah.
in COVID. When car
Yeah.
costs jumped
Yeah,
up like they
yeah.
did, then that would definitely change
Yeah.
the model for a lot of people or
So
shifted the numbers.
when you're talking about this profitability question um that we're talking about
Mhm.
today, has that changed in the last, it's been 5 years, 4 years?
Yes and no. I don't see. We're only recently starting to see more operating expenses coming in. It's just been the nature of
Oh,
my
okay.
work as a coach. We don't really get into the financial
Yeah.
side. We're more on
Yeah.
operations and front end.
Well, and I was asking you this morning, can you like take back or like go back, and we've been collecting data through V8
Mhm.
for the last year, but there are other clients that we were collecting data when we were doing their monthly reports, and I was like, can you like extrapolate from these? And Jim's like, we've really until now, unless it's a very specific thing for a client, we're going into operational costs too, because that becomes
Yeah.
part of the
Well,
question
that's
as well.
something that we've started to do that with coaching clients to collect their expense side so that we can advise them
Yeah.
in some of those aspects, really as it relates to cash flow, like operational cash flow. Are we
Yeah.
cash positive? Yes or no?
Yeah.
And then, so we're here to talk about profitability, but naturally you and I spend more time here talking about cash flow because it's like that's how we think about this. And I think when I'm thinking about somebody who's brand new to the business and they're being introduced to the first time to this idea around phantom profit, or maybe it's somebody listening who's not been in the buy here, pay here business, and they don't recognize that, when a buy here, pay here dealer buys a car for, $5,000 and sells it for $9,000 and they get $1,000 down. Well, they've got, in that case, $4,000 of risk. They're still negative on cash, but they've got $4,000 of gross profit that they just generated from that sale that the IRS views as income. And so this is what we mean by phantom profit, sometimes called paper profit. It's money that we earned according to the IRS, or we certainly owe taxes on it, but we haven't yet put it in the bank. We can't spend it. It's not like I can go to my techs in the shop on a Friday and say, "Hey, I'm a little short on cash." But the good news is we sold 4 cars, so that we'll be collecting that over the next 3 years. So I can pay you over the next 3 years if those customers pay me.
Yeah.
Right? That's just
Yeah.
not how our business works in buy here, pay here. So we have this problem where we have cash demands up front. If we didn't have strategies around the IRS element, then we would have additional cash demands associated with income tax. And so again, for those folks who are new, that when we talk about phantom profit or paper profit, we're talking about paper, and that's really mostly even still what we're talking about today. It's just ways to measure it, ways to really look at the numbers and think about, and keep in mind, I was first a member of an NCM 20 group back in 2007, 6 or 7, maybe when I started my dealership in 05. But anyway, back in those days when I was a 20 group member, your composite captured some of this kind of information that we're going to talk about today. And so this is where I was kind of first introduced to this method of looking at profitability. And then there've been some others, coaches, the Ken Shilsons, and some of these folks that you hear, kind of their approach. And of course, Ken himself is a CPA by education and by career. And so that's mostly, how he sees it is from an accounting standpoint, mostly how he talks about it. Whereas I'm more operational, day-to-day kind of, in the weeds and in the cash flows. So I'm trying to bring to this morning from a white hat perspective. I'm just trying to say, if I'm a white hat dealer, here's what we want to think about in terms of we need to make sure we're profitable, because in order for us to be a successful white hat dealer, we got to stay in business. We got to stay afloat in order to support our customers and build the kind of business that's going to be an asset to the community and be around and really, be a resource in the community. Then we got to first take care of ourselves. We got to make sure that we get to a place where we're successful. So let's talk about.
But it's yes. And the kind of cash that these businesses generate can be kind of intoxicating. And you're thinking, well, I've got this much coming in and this much going out, and this is a lot. What you're talking about profitability is not cash in, cash out as much as it is overall. Am I correct in that? It's like, it's easy to get into this, idea of, I've got cash, I can just throw it at the things that I need to throw it at. I remember I've worked as a server before, and you take home a lot of cash for tips and all of that, and that cash it starts to burn a hole in your pocket. And so this is kind of a different way of from our conversation this morning of looking at profitability in a bigger scale, 10,000 foot kind of a way of looking at it. I mean, you can drill it down to the contracts per contract, but it's a way of looking at it so that you're hedging what happens normally in a contract and in a business and all of those kind of things.
Yeah, and this is why these topics can be challenging, because when you can't map it out on paper, and I'm very visual, so I like to draw the stuff. But even with that, you've just got these different elements to our business. And I think what you're talking about is when you referred to being a service, like that's assuming you're taking home cash, and you're talking about it like I've got cash and I'm going to put it in certain envelopes because that's for rent and that's for this and that, or I've got to allocate the funds. Well, a lot of our dealers that are brand new, they're not in that situation. They're shelling out lots of cash, more than they're bringing in by far. And so that's why the negative cash, and there's the cash component. But what I'm saying is, if you think about the typical dealer that kind of grows to a place where they've got 100 accounts, and maybe in 100 accounts they're cash positive, probably not. It takes a certain amount of overhead to run a business. But when you look at that, you just want to look at. Let me break it up in two ways. Let me share on the screen first this thing about. Make sure I got the right.
I wanted to. Rudy also said, I think that we need departments of efficiency.
Yeah,
and that's
Is Trump nominating? Is he?
Well, I heard something around Elon Musk being on a task force for governmental efficiency.
Oh, cool.
And like super transparent. If you're not already a member of X, that's probably where a lot of it's going to go. So
that's great. They will get more efficient. They'll get it to where we just take rockets to work. That'll get us to work much more quickly.
I want to put the money into a transporter,
so
we can be there. Right. Yeah.
So I think, Rudy, I get your point. I think we definitely have to look at, efficiencies in our business. I think for today, I would challenge people to think about this in two ways. And this is kind of part that is taken shape for me as an advisor, somebody's been around it for a long time. I only in recent years, last 5 years or so, have I started to separate the way to think about this stuff in terms of, think about you're a finance company, right? As a buy here, pay here, even if you don't have a separate related finance company, you have a finance arm to your business.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a sales company, inventory management, sell the car, replace the car, sell another car. But in the meantime, there's this portfolio over here that's running, that's a finance arm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you think about, let's separate their profitability into those different divisions. So let's look
Okay.
first. What I have on the slide on the screen here first, and this is one of those things where you're going to want to find it on YouTube and kind
Yeah.
of see the numbers. But let me just kind of
Okay.
explain.
This is an East Coast dealer.
Yeah, this is an East Coast dealer. This is actual numbers from a dealer that we're working with, and is one of our V8 members, and they just happen to have expenses reported. So I just jumped in and used theirs as an illustration. So these are, again, actual numbers from a dealer. And what you see on the first line there is interest collected. So, if we think about a simple interest contract, then contracts can accrue interest until the customer makes a payment, right? But based on the balance of the customer's account, but we don't really experience the income until we collect the interest. Okay. So this is on actual interest collected and deposited. Okay. So that's cash to us, right?
Yeah.
And that's being generated by the portfolio based on whatever interest rate we've charged, all customers across the portfolio collectively. And then that's line item, that's line one.
Mm-hmm.
Then line two is net charge-offs. So we just take the gross charge-off. And for some of our listeners on some softwares, I won't mention names, but you got to be careful. You think you're looking at gross charge-offs, but you're really looking at net. You got to add back in your repo recovery proceeds, because they some of them handle it differently. But bottom line is what we want to end up with is net charge-offs. We got to get the gross amount, which would be the gross principal balance on the account at the time that the account charged off. That's a gross charge-off. Then we adjust for the repo recovery if there is any, and that would give us a net charge-off. So you could look at this number on any period of time. You could look at a single month. You could look at a quarter, a year, whatever. But what you're looking for, and this is what lenders often look for, your Prima Lens and Spartans are going to look pretty carefully at interest coverage, is the interest that we're collecting on the portfolio covering the net losses. So that's what interest is really charged for. That's why we charge a higher interest rate, because we anticipate higher losses. And so we see that number in our V8 groups that people are a little bit all over the place with that. Some are quite high. They're generating quite a lot of interest in excess of their net charge-offs, and others are underwater,
So I know my first question, because I'm looking at the numbers and I'm going, that's, a substantial increase. We've worked with dealers that they hold on to contracts for a long time before they finally charge them off, for a lot of different reasons. And so, we teach that it's better to keep your portfolio as clean as possible. And we've actually, one of our clients that you had for years in his 20 group, he would get chastised by the other members. It's like, you're charging off too soon. But he had a very clean portfolio, and he came from banking. I mean, like an exec banking level. And so this is the way that he, in like understanding money and being able to keep things as really having things flow nicely. He did a pretty quick charge off, and I believe we've been working with this dealer, for the East Coast dealer, for a while. So I imagine that he's not been holding on to charge offs.
No, this is clean, but I think I don't want to run the risk of confusing people, because I think in that scenario that you're describing, that would contribute to efficiency and a lot of other things. I'm glad you brought it up, because one of the things that we are working to create in our curriculum for some of the upcoming education around White Hat Way is what I would call financial and operational discipline. Okay. So what I mean by that is having the internal policies and having the discipline to adhere to those policies and to charge off routinely. Why? Because if I'm lending to you and you're the
Mhm.
dealer and you're not taking your charge offs, your profitability looks better. You
Mhm.
kid yourself into thinking that you're doing better. And so you
Yeah.
need to take those charge offs. We would be recommending and writing a policy that says we're going to take charge offs that meet a certain criteria.
Yeah.
Could have an occasional exception to keep
Yeah.
one.
And we've seen with charge offs a couple of other ways that it's been taken care of. One, when we've witnessed and we've gone deep into dealerships numbers that the general manager or whoever is not charging things off because it affects their bonus.
Mhm.
And so, it's and that when we've worked with new dealers that have been in business for a long time, we're like, there is all this dead weight on your
Mhm.
portfolio. Let's get it charged off. That it scares dealers to death to see that happen in a chunk.
Well,
But this here, I mean, because it looks really awful on their numbers. But
so
if they
that just
had,
makes that's about external forces.
yeah,
Like that's external pressures, right? Line of
yes,
credit, whatever. We got
yes.
covenants,
Yeah.
whatever. So that's
But
creating pressures.
so the point is that it's better to do it in a very timely and rhythmically kind of way.
Write a policy and
Write a
follow it.
policy and follow it, because then, when you are stringing numbers together and overlaying them year over year over year over year, you have cleaner data to look
Mhm.
at
Right.
than holding on. So, I think with this too, it's one of the first things is make sure you get a good policy and then stick with it. But
Right.
let's go into this.
Yeah. So I think the bottom line here is that, again, our two line items, line one is interest collected. The next line is net charge-offs, and we're
Mhm.
just subtracting net charge-offs from interest. Just
Mhm.
say, are we in the black or are we in the red here? Are we collecting more interest than our
Mhm.
equivalent net charge-offs for the same period?
Uh-huh.
So again, it could be across any period that you want to measure, but you can see that this particular dealer, this is based by, I don't know if it says it on the headers, but this is based on 3-month rolling averages. So it's not going to spike up and down a whole lot
Yeah.
because the dealer had some extra charge-offs 1 month, right? So
Mhm.
this is going to be across a 3-month average is what we're using here. And you can see that the dealer's been above water. And this last month in October was the first time their 3-month average dipped below.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's not necessarily an alarm button. It is something to watch and be aware of. But I think for our conversation here, we're really just suggesting that think about your portfolio. Is your portfolio supporting itself? Because if our interest collected is covering our net charge-offs, then we don't have to adjust that. That's not really reflected, or it would be neutral adjustments in our profit and loss report. Right.
Mhm.
If we're a sales company and a finance company, a buy here, pay here dealership without an RFC, and it's all on the same financial statement,
Mhm.
then the finance losses are kind of being taken care of by themselves.
Mhm.
Okay, so this is something that's the part that I'm saying is new for me in the last 5 years to really think about the portfolio separately like that. I'm used to kind of just lumping it all together and looking at the thing, especially with related
Mhm.
finance companies in the picture. But now if I go to the next slide, I'm just taking that same information that we have at the top of the report and adding some of the numbers around operating expenses. So this is where
Okay.
only in the last 3 months or so have we started to collect from dealers operating expenses, and we're doing it differently. We only ask them to turn it in quarterly,
Mhm.
turn in the most recent quarter, and so all the numbers that we work from are just whatever the average month is from the most recent quarter. And now we just load that information in here. So that's what we're looking at here. In this particular case, we're working off of the second quarter. This dealer they don't have all 3 months from quarter number 3 in. So I'm just using the numbers off of, and that's why those numbers are in bold down there. You can see the average. I can't quite read it, but let me expand my screen so I can.
Operating expense unit per sold. Is that the one you're?
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure. So the operating, per unit sold for this dealer in the second quarter came out to be $6,537.
It looks like you've had that strung all the way across.
I did. I just used it and I kind of italicized it saying I'm using the same number because I don't have any updated numbers for this particular dealer, right? So I'm just using that as the most recent data available. But on the first row, for those not seeing the screen, the first line in this little kind of subsection is average gross profit. So this is, again, a 3-month rolling average. So it's not it's not spiking because we sold some different kind of cars.
I mean, it looks like it's pretty
pretty consistent.
It's pretty consistent within about $400.
Yeah. So that's our gross profit per sale. So why do we separate that? Well, because if we don't have to adjust from our profit from the sale anything related to the charge-offs. So this is kind of a different way to think about it. In most industries, if you're a taco stand or a shoe store, you don't have to think this way, right? But in our business, we have both components. We have sales and collections and so on, sales and finance. So now we have an average gross profit from add-ons. So in this case, this number could be a lot higher with some if they're doing reinsurance and they're going to have additional profit that they generate from sale of a gap policy or sale of a service contract. There could be additional line item there for additional profits besides just the markup on the car. And now we have, and that equals an average gross profit per deal with, in this case, I only have $299 on the add-ons because this dealer doesn't do aftermarket. They only have a doc fee. So that's a number that's not reflected in the sale. So I have it in there. So now we're at an average gross profit of about $7,700 with the doc fee. And now we just look at that minus our operating expenses of $6,500 per unit sold. So this same thing, you could do this across a quarter. I would recommend doing it on a quarter. Look, because you can have weird months where you had extra expenses or whatever. So I would say look at it on a quarterly basis at least and use that average. And so we're just saying our average operating expense per vehicle sold in that quarter was X. So we just subtract that from the gross profit that we're enjoying on the average per car. And that is some reflection of your profitability. So this dealer, in this example, their rolling average back in April was $1,084. So the dealer would say, that's my profit per car sold. And now they would just multiply that times what I sell, 15 cars, 20 cars. That's going to be roughly my profit for the month. But let's just remember, that's not in the bank. That's paper profit again. But it is an indication of, that is the profit that I can expect to put in the bank over X number of months. And so this is why we just urge dealers to think of it this way, break it down this way, because it is my belief based on what I see in all these numbers is that when we're able to run in the black on those, we're in a pretty healthy position. Those operating expenses, often we create a different line item for cost of external debt, like if we got a line of credit or the cost of money that we're sourcing, or maybe it's a partner that we're paying, 10% on their money or whatever, then we would have a separate line item for those. Because I think it's important to have operating expenses and then have kind of external expenses associated with debt and financing as just a different line item. So dealers can kind of separate that and see what that looks like. But I would say generally speaking, if you are in the black with these numbers, then you're in a pretty healthy position. And you can monitor it and watch and see if anything needs to be adjusted there. But these are nice just because you've got 3-month rolling average strung together month over month. And so you're not going to see big spikes. You're going to be able to kind of chart a trend pretty well. And in this case, this dealer, obviously the glaring thing when you look at that is, wow, our profitability on the portfolio is declining because you can see that it was running 25 grand back in June, 24 grand August, 11 grand in September, and now 13 under in the month of October, again, across a 3-month period. So could they have just taken some extra charge-offs? Maybe, but this still begs the question is, if you didn't have this, what method would you have to know that your profitability in your portfolio is declining? You're experiencing higher losses. Your interest is pretty much the same because your portfolio is remaining about the same in terms of number of accounts. You can see that top line is running pretty consistently about 68 grand of interest income for this particular dealer. I forget how many accounts they have, 250 or something. But that's the idea here is that when you have that information, now you can begin to say, oh, my portfolio is underperforming.
So how long would it take for a declining portfolio before, for someone that's not tracking, someone that's just, it's like just watching cash in, cash out, blah, blah, blah. How long would it take with a declining portfolio before they felt a pinch?
It would depend on a lot of operational answers because it depends on what their cost of operating is, whether they would really
Mhm.
feel it. Because these profits, like that net charge-off number, that's just paper to
Mhm.
them.
Mhm.
That's a write-off of an account. Yes, it quits producing a $500 car payment, but it's kind of hard to feel in that way. In fact, they probably, from a cash perspective, when they charge off these accounts, they recover the repos, we hope, and so they actually feel some cash gain, a little cash bump from recovering
Uh-huh.
those repos. So they may not feel it in their bank accounts as much, but what it's saying here is, hey, friend, the portfolio is no longer supporting itself.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Rudy is quite active this morning with
Good,
the
good. He's
show,
always
which I
got good
love.
questions.
Wow, I'd love to see those expenses break down.
Yeah.
And then the second thing was that business model could be shocked by an even small interest rate change. And so, which is true because there's,
You mean the cost of money for a line of credit probably is what it is.
Rudy, if you're still listening, you can go ahead and clarify, but I think that it just, to me, the first thing that question said, and it's so true, is, whenever we like, how do you do this thing? And you post it online, someone posts this thing, and how do you do it online? It's like, depends.
Yeah, yeah.
And that there are so many moving pieces in a business model that one small tweak
Mhm.
can change an awful lot, which is one of the reasons why Rudy said, yes, cost of capital.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely. So I
Yeah.
think that's looking at the cost side.
Uh-huh.
Go ahead. Do you have something else?
Yeah, Rudy's
It'll come
thanks,
back.
Rudy.
Yeah.
My
It'll come back.
menopause brain just
Yeah,
kicked in.
Yeah. It's something fun. We get to, I love trying to finish out or guess what the rest of the thought was going to be.
Yeah.
It's fun
And
game for me.
sometimes he's right. And
Sometimes,
sometimes he's
yeah.
so far off.
Sometimes like to know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think the other thing I would think about Rudy, and this is, I'm glad
I
this came up.
remembered what it was.
Let me quickly illustrate
Okay.
the thought around. So when I could have read Rudy's question around, adjusting the interest would, let's say, for example, I'm a dealer in my portfolio and I got 100 accounts. And because I see that I'm a little bit underwater in my interest coverage, I could jump my interest rate from 20% to 24%.
Mm-hmm.
Well, isn't that interesting? Because the customer's payment is probably still going to be the same. Let's say, use an example of $500 a month. All this means is that more of what we collect from the customer is now reflected in interest.
Mm-hmm.
But from a cash perspective, we don't feel it, right? It's the same $500 payment from the customer. So it's just an important thing for folks who are new to this industry to really, differentiate, because we do find that dealers who are coming from retail, or franchise space, and they're not used to this finance arm, that it takes a while to adjust mentally to this kind of big paradigm shift that we talk about. And so now I'm taking them even further into a paradigm shift. Is let's think about, because like in this example with October getting negative, now we could think, okay, so now that is going to start to hit our sales company profit and loss, because we were kind of quarantined over there and we had everything performing and the interest was supporting our losses. Now that's not true, which means our losses are going to have to hit, they are expenses in the IRS's eyes. They're going to hit our income statement on the global operation, regardless of whether there's a finance company or whatever. But I just think this is part of what the challenge is and part of why I wanted to talk about it. But I think in a white hat context, I'm really saying white hat dealers they're going to be playing this long game. We can't play a long game unless you're in business next year, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And
so you got to really think about, how do I support my customers, help my customers be successful, and take care of myself and my team, my family in the process. Business has to be.
Yeah. You can't
profitable.
help people unless it's kind of like that whole oxygen mask thing on an airplane. You got to make sure that you're being taken care of too, and that your business is being taken care of, and then get out there and help people.
And then add to the fact that these dealers are busy. They just have a hard time getting it to their desk enough to run these kind of numbers. So this is obviously part of what happens in V8 is we compile this stuff and they're able to see it month over month in comparison to other dealers and have conversations around, hey, what's broke? What worked for you?
We're always talking about you can't. You can't until you measure something, then it's just speculation about how, why, all of that. I would also, I remembered the thing. I wrote it down so that I could remember it too. When a dealer, we've worked with like lots of dealers, and sometimes I see a dealer, I want to, either it's a goal or it's a problem that they want to accomplish or solve. And one thing we really, really encourage, strongly advise, is that you track your numbers, you track the things, and if you're gonna make an adjustment, that you not make 5 adjustments at once.
Right.
Because I mean, we've watched that with dealers where it's like they're throwing anything and everything at the problem, and then you honestly can't definitively say what worked.
Right.
Was it a combination? Was it a single thing?
Right.
Were some things taking it down, but others taking it up, but it leveled itself out to an improvement? So, tracking and following numbers and then making tweaks and giving it a few months, till you start to see things, that shift that's happening. And, if it's positive. And so from how you do your numbers, when you go 3-month rolling average, give it 2 or 3 months. And then start the next thing, and then start the next thing,
Right.
and see what you can do to shift and change. And because that big red thing, is that insurmountable? No. So what would you, I mean, I know that you understand the inner workings of this business because you've been working with them for a while. What would you tell them is well, the business. So I was going to say a solution. I mean, what do you do?
First thing you do is, to your point about measuring, we go back and start doing postmortems on the charge-offs, because my first thought there is you're not going to, even if you adjusted APR, like you bumped up your interest rate, that's not going to be felt for a while, right? So you're going to, because you're collecting interest on the portfolio that's out there already. So you're not going to move the needle much on that number. So it's really about just net charge-offs. We either got to start finding solutions and sparing, not have the repo and charge-off. And the other component of that would be to improve our repo proceeds and the recovery on our repo proceeds. But that's usually following a book value.
Yeah.
So, that is what it is when we recover the car. But we just first got to make sure we recover our collateral when we can't save the account. But it really just begs the question, what's going on? Like it's forensic analysis. It's that postmortem thing.
That was something that I was going to, I didn't hear postmortem in my career until I went into a corporate setting. And that's unfortunate because once I learned what that was, that I was like, oh, that's so beneficial. That's so, because and I'd like to do a show in the next little bit on what a postmortem is and why they're helpful.
Good. Yeah.
Because a postmortem, just so you all know, it's like, when someone dies and you take a look at all of the factors and you like, this is the cause of death. Autopsy. Yeah. It's kind of the same thing, but it can be used for positive and negative. And it's like that. And this is another thing that I will go into it, but that there is some kind of policy and procedure around doing a postmortem so that you can start to track your trends even in that, because that is a really, if you've never done a postmortem before on a charge off, or charge off is usually repo or whatever. It's this is going to be a really good one, a good show when we'll do it next week. For you to to get an idea and wrap your head around about what it is, what components should be in it, and how how it can help you.
Right.
And like I've even in corporate, we did postmortems after a conference,
Mhm.
and that's not a loss. It's
Yeah.
just like, let's look at this. And it's a really an important part of running a business.
Yeah, well,
Mhm.
especially in our business, we're in Buy Here Pay Here, where we have underwriting and collection. So
Mhm.
you would want to examine those. And I hear a lot of dealers do it as a team. They'll sit
Mhm.
down at the close of a month, run through their list of charge-offs and analyze them one at a time, and get the team
Mhm.
together and say, why do we feel like we lost this one?
Mhm.
You know, what were the circumstances? And identifying that reason
Mhm.
lets you now
Mhm.
measure that, identify that. Is there something more we could be doing? You know, should we talk about extending our warranty?
Mhm.
What would be
Yep.
solutions for some of this? So that, yeah, it's just analyzing.
Yeah,
the
and I would
losses.
say that Steve Levine would say, and take your policy book with you, because if this is something that needs to have a shift in policy, so
Mhm.
that from then going forward, because this is a trend. This is
Steve would
something
be
that
so proud of you
Steve would
for
be so proud of me. I
referencing
know,
his
Steve.
policy making.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
You're
that's right.
welcome.
It's really from a compliance standpoint, it does make sense. We
Yeah.
do have new
Mhm.
layers of obligations in our underwriting. But I
Yeah.
think it's, you think about just losses. Your question was, what would I be doing if I were, coaching that dealer, which we are. We're just basically going to say, let's look at our losses. Let's figure out why our losses are up. What are we doing differently, if anything,
Mhm.
and
Did
what can be
anything
adjusted
change with those?
with our collection
And
practices.
again, it's like you charged off. Well, how old were the accounts? Did anything happen during that time? I mean, are they all from the same batch? Are they
Sure.
all? There's so much to look at that can be super helpful.
What are the characteristics? So when we get to that
Mhm.
podcast,
Yep.
we'll look at deal structure,
Mhm.
we'll look at customer
Yeah.
kind of qualifications and so on, but underwriting.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's part of what I'd be looking at. So again, just with our profitability things, just gotta kind of know the way to measure it.
Yeah. And measure.
Mhm.
Measure.
And these numbers we shared today are pretty easy for most dealers to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. All righty, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's Wednesday.
Mhm.
And we have another show on Friday, and we're going to be pulling some people together that were at the Buy Here Pay Here Dealer Forum
Correct.
to kind of talk about the highlights and
Mhm.
and all of that.
So I'll be calling you.
You'll be
folks today.
calling.
Don't be
Yep.
bashful.
All right, everybody. Have such a great rest of your day. We will see you on Friday. And if there's ever anything that we can do to help, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on social media. And Jim just loves helping solve problems.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again so much. We will see you on Friday.